I'm great at informality, not so great at formality. But I'm gonna start with reading a little bit of, if we can have the next slide so we can introduce our wonderful panelists. There is my slide. So recently Springboard, and I always forget about myself, so I have to remember. It's one of the things that I'm working on post-pandemic is to highlight the work that I do. So, I started working with Springboard when I arrived here in the Twin Cities 2 years ago. I am originally from Chicago, the Southwest side, and one of the really wonderful things that Springboard does is highlight the work of artists, and specifically their artist career consultants. And recently they did a profile on me that they have in their creative exchange. So you can, take a look at that. We'll drop the link. And so for our panelists, obviously Chanita needs no introduction. She is an incredible force. Somebody that I am getting to know, very, very recently. My husband and I had the pleasure of visiting the exhibition, and it was a wonderful pivot, I think, that shows just how sort of flexible Chanita and her team can be in, facing a pandemic, transforming an exhibition so that it could be enjoyed by the public out in where we can safely gather. So next is DA. D.A. Bullock is an award-winning filmmaker and social practice artist. His films have been featured at national and international film festivals, including the Toronto International Film Festival and AMP, the Chicago International Film Festival. He's the winner of the Best Feature Film 2003 Urban World Film Festival in New York. Excuse me. In 2011, Bullock founded Bully Creative Shop, a feature film, documentary, media art, and digital content social enterprise. Bullock is a 2014 McKnight IFP Media Artist Fellow, 2015 Minnesota State Art Board Grant recipient, and 2016 Intermedia Arts City of Minneapolis Creative City Making Artist, and a 2017 Bush Fellow. He is a North Minneapolis resident and member of Juxtaposition Arts Co-op Studios, and leading member of the Minneapolis Black Arts Movement that has played a significant role in recent social justice history. His cinematography work can be seen currently in the Array releasing documentary film Vanishing Pearls, which told the story of Louisiana Black oyster fishermen and their struggle and trauma after the BP Gulf of Mexico oil spill in 2010. Array releasing is the film distribution arm of Ava DuVernay's film movement. The film is available through Netflix. And Bullock is the co-founder of the Underground Media Collective and co-host of The Underground, a podcast radio show broadcast locally on WFNU LP, low power community radio station of the Frogtown neighborhood. The podcast radio show is yet another history, culture, and story sharing platform that centers community. And next up,
hopefully the cops won't overreact to these guys sitting here. We are peaceful, okay? We don't care what they try to do to entice people, but we are peaceful. Oh man, this week I probably have had a combined maybe 10 hours of sleep. And honestly, in moments like this, you're running on adrenaline and you're running on fumes and you're running on this fight for justice. And those are the things that keep me going. I realized this was my calling when I was a child. I grew up in South Central Los Angeles. There were a number of issues happening in our community, from the war on drugs to poverty to marginalization. And I had seen lawyers on television advocating for people and using their voices. And I thought, well, maybe if I become a lawyer, then I can use my voice and I can change things. And I've just followed that path throughout my life.
Next up, we have Tricia Heuring. Tricia Heuring is a Thai-American curator and arts organizer. Her curatorial practice is balanced between individualized support for emerging artists and building systemic change in the nonprofit arts sector. She is the co-founder of Public Functionary, a multidisciplinary platform that centers BIPOC and under-resourced artists, now in its 8th year of programming. Tricia is a graduate of Macalester College and holds an MA in Arts Management from St. Mary's University. She teaches cultural leadership at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. Tricia was born in Bangkok, Thailand, raised in Cairo, Egypt, and currently lives in Northeast Minneapolis. And I believe we're going to see a bit of a video that Tricia.
I love being in this space so much. I always feel so inspired, and I can't believe it's been 2 years since it launched. So when you think back on it, what are you most proud of?
I'm just proud that it came together the way we envisioned it. I mean, even better. And it's a community space that I would have really loved to have at the beginning of my own practice. I mean, it really is a collaboration, right? To see how the artists have really taken this idea and ran with it. And we've been able to graduate artists from the program. We've been able to bring new artists in. It's been really amazing. Yeah, so this is a really difficult time for artists, not just in our community, but across the world. In what ways are we, do you see this space really changing the trajectory for artists in this community?
I mean, I think that, PF Studios wasn't something that we conceived of before. It came as a result of all the groundwork that was laid with Studio 400, and it naturally progressed because this is the way the artists grew the program. The new way is to create platforms and create space and then let artists define how they want to use them and how they want to, make them into something bigger. And I love that organic flow, and I think that that's what Public Functionary is known for, and what we kind of have to roll with was that we don't have the answers and that we just build relationships with artists. We continue to invest in their practice, and it kind of keeps growing.
Totally, a space that's artist-centered and that really, meets the needs of what artists, desire for themselves and their work at this time.
I think that a lot of times it's just trying to fit artists into programs instead of, letting artists shape the programs as they go, or thinking, we need all of these BIPOC artists to do exhibitions because we need diversity, but then not investing in the actual resources and spaces that they need and, mentorship and their own space to build their communities and their audiences from.
Yep,
so,
artists need space.
Exactly, so it's like investments in just all of these different layers of a new kind of arts ecosystem.
So next, Ananya Chatterjea's work as a choreographer, dancer, organizer, and thinker brings together contemporary dance, social justice, choreography, and a commitment to healing justice. She is artistic director of Ananya Dance Theater, a Twin Cities-based professional dance company of BIPOC women and femmes, co-leader of the Schwangram Institute for Performance and Social Justice, and professor of dance at the University of Minnesota. I believe we're going to see a clip as well.
starting over.
Thank you for that. So next up, Kathryn Haddad is a writer, teacher, and community organizer whose work explores contemporary Arab American experiences and reflects on the political reality of life for Arab and Muslim Americans. She is the co-founder and executive and artistic director of the New Arab American Theater Works. Kathryn is a 2004-2005 recipient of an Archibald Bush Leadership Fellowship for her work with the Arab American community. She is a recipient of the 2018 Kay Sexton Award from the Minnesota Book Awards for her work with the Arab American community, and is a 2019-2020 Jerome Artist Fellow. Kathryn has had her work appear on stages throughout the Twin Cities, far and beyond. She is a published author and frequent speaker locally and nationally. Kathryn was the co-founder and artistic and executive director of MISNA, where she served for 12 years. She has taught high school for over 25 years and serves on the board of the Loft Literary Center and as part of the core committee of the National Middle East North African Theater Makers Association. And I believe we're gonna see a clip of her work as well.
Hi, I'm Khaldun Saman. When I was a child, my parents used to always say, Habibi, yalla tabal. Yalla means come on, or in a nice way, come on drum, Habibi. We were gonna initially call it yalla tabal, but it doesn't translate so well, and we decided to go yalla drum. It's forgotten a lot of times because we like the more highbrow instruments, which are also beautiful, like the oud, right, and the violin. But drumming is always one of those that people immediately gravitate towards.
My name is Kathryn Haddad, and I'm the Artistic and Executive Director of New Arab American Theater Works.
1, 2.
Yellow Drum is fantastic because it is organic, it is based in the cultural tradition of drumming, but yet isn't something that is musty, historic from the past that we're, presenting like a museum piece. It's living and growing and organic.
All right, so we've got a wonderful panel of artists, cultural producers, and I wanted to kick off this this conversation first acknowledging, the rough year, essentially. We're rounding up on a year in March that we've been in this pandemic. Oh, I think I got muted. All right, I'm back. The pandemic, the uprisings, the impact that that's had on everyone's sort of lives. I think to not acknowledge that, would be to miss the elephant in the room, and also, what's gone on politically in the last couple of weeks. And in addition to that, to acknowledge that in Minneapolis, we've lost a great person, Amelia Brown. I know that a lot of people had great relationships with Amelia, and I've seen folks doing tributes on social media. Personally, I met Amelia through Springboard for the Arts. She was a leader there on the emergency arts. I wish I had known her better, but the contact that I did have, she was incredible. And it's so rough when we lose folks in our community who we feel have gone too early. When Laura and Shanita and I were talking about what would help drive the conversation today, Laura highlighted an article that Arundhati Roy recently wrote about the pandemic as a portal. And so Shanita selected this quote. I'm going to read it so we can kind of kick off the conversation that way. So it goes, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our databanks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly, with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. And as I read that, that just it gives me chills. I think what it's asked of me anyway, and I'd like to hear what the rest of the panelists think as well, is what is our role in the pandemic, and what are we carrying through? And I will start, and I hope that I can call on our esteemed panel, unless somebody wants to volunteer. Maybe DA can go next. So he'll start thinking about his response as I give mine. For me, sort of the carcasses that I'm leaving behind are saying yes to everything, or feeling obligated by commitments or sort of ideas that I have to sort of achieve certain things, and being able to say no and really focus on what the pandemic highlighted for me as important. And to me now, that's family. I've always tried to bring my family along with me on this ride. And so, as unconventional as it might be to bring your baby to a Zoom meeting, or, your partner to a work event, those are things that I have been practicing before the pandemic, and really am going to carry forward through. So, Dia, I'm going to put you on the spot. What about you?
It's a great question, and it's a wonderful quote and idea. Just the portal idea, and I think about relieving burdens. Like, I know even Erykah Badu has a song where she says "pack light," like she's talking about like relieving don't take those burdens of the trauma with you as you're passing through the portal. And it can be complicated because, a lot of our practice and praxis is intertwined and interwoven into our response, either our healing response or our resilient response to trauma and struggle, particularly in cultural communities, because we built armor and we built strength out of our resistance and out of our resilience and our struggle. So I think that's what I'm trying to lay down as I pass through the portal, is a lot of the burden, a lot of the weight that I don't need, the weight that doesn't serve me in this radical imagination of a future, while maintaining sort of the roots and the connection to the past and my ancestors, and to the struggle that they had to bring me to where I am now. So it's a delicate balance, and it's complicated, but I think we do need to relieve ourselves of some of those burdens.
I definitely hear that in terms of kind of the vulnerability, embracing sort of the vulnerability and the softness that struggle creates. And I think historically you're right. I think a lot of struggle has led to sort of a hardening. And that sort of hardening is something that I see in my own, community struggle. And sometimes that hardening perpetuated hurt. And so how do we use vulnerability and softness? How do we become, how do we say, yes, we've been through a lot. I feel like a warrior, but a warrior who can learn through vulnerability and softness, not only hardness and just kind of preparedness, which is real as well. The trauma that we experience in terms of survival can create feels like sometimes like a scar that you're softening up. So I appreciate that, and that definitely resonates with me. Any one of our other panelists want to comment on what are you bringing through this portal?
Hi, I'm Ananya. I'll say a little bit that I feel that what I'm bringing is the recognition of multiplicity always, because, even as people were talking about the pandemic, the murder of George Floyd, another pandemic is the racism, another pandemic is the long systemic unawareness of the public housing, low-income housing, and the strange thing of people, the sort of racial hatred against people whose labor is fundamental in building this economy, and people whose land we are on. They were the people who were the primary group of unhoused community. So the recognition of multiplicity is core if we're going to make art about, I make social justice choreography. If we're going to do that, we have to really think about how to weave together multiple threads, be present to all of those at the same time. And that's an ethic of care in art making. And I want to just hold that up for a minute.
Absolutely. And I think the sort of daunting challenge to hold up the multiplicity, it's big. You really have to sort of dig deep and learn on multiple levels, and also know that everything is connected. Can I call on Kathryn?
Sure. Hi. Well, I think for me, something that I always try to keep present, but is definitely more apparent to me during the pandemic, is the temporary nature of everything, the temporary nature of life, the temporary nature of relationships, how important it is to focus on the goal and what is important and not get distracted along the way. And I feel like the pandemic has made that very clear for me. I try always not to take things for granted, but I feel like the pandemic has been a reminder of all that I have taken for granted and all that I need to be aware of in life, health, simple things, to not take it for granted, not take my privileges for granted, and the fact that there's a limited amount of time. And I think maybe as you get to be a certain age, you see that more. But how are we going to be focused on the work that we need to do and what that work is, because we really have only a limited amount of time to do that work. Those things have become very clear to me, and I hope to keep those with me beyond the pandemic.
Yeah, I think that really resonates in terms of what is my time, what is, and it's terrible to say. I mean, I don't want to think of these in these terms, but what is worth my time, and also what is most important, what rises to the top, and really not feeling guilty about saying no to those things that don't. Tricia, can you give us your thoughts on the pandemic, multiple pandemics as a portal?
Am I muted? Okay. I love this article by Roy. I read it at the beginning of the pandemic. So it was one of the first things I just really remember. It was early on, and what it meant to me at that point versus thinking about it again now, almost a year in, is really just the brilliance of that piece. But I remember reading it and thinking that it gave me hope, and it illuminated the pandemic in a really different light for the first time, within that like frenzy of fear and confusion and worry and how long are we going to be in this? How long is this going to last? People were saying it would be 2 years, and I was like, no way, 2 years? There's no way. And here we are. But I remember it gave me this idea of sort of like, okay, there's a purpose to this, there's a reason. But I think what I'm reflecting on now is that at that time, I was looking at the portal as like, okay, here we go, we're going through it. But actually it's that through time that's really significant. And that sort of like going through the portal, which may take several years, to this other world is the part that I wasn't quite prepared for. And I think that the answer to being, resilient and making it through that portal is sort of what Ananya touched on, is this idea of this ethic of care and what it means to care for ourselves, our bodies, our families, our homes. I mean, thinking about the adjustments that we've all made to our living spaces in the last year in order to be surrounded in the way that we need to be, care for our relationships, care for our communities so that, we don't pass COVID along or we don't, make it worse. I think that you know, it's this article has just illuminated so much in terms of like, let's not worry too much about what's on the other side. We'll get there. But what does it mean to navigate through the portal, which is honestly much, much longer than I thought it would be.
I think you're alluding to the length of time, and also knowing that people's memory is very short. I think people are very eager to get back to normal. And I think that this is a critical time where if we rush to get back to normal or recover, that a lot of those sort of like lessons that you all have talked about right now, we really run the risk of them kind of sort of falling and not getting carried through to the other side whenever it is. And I really like you're focusing on being in the portal, and continuing to bring whatever it is that we're learning right now into the future. Don't let it fall. Don't let it drop. And I mean, but the reality is that I'm so excited to be able to share my new child with my community of people in person. Zoom can only sustain us so far. I'm grateful for the time that I've spent communing with people online. But yes, I want to see my community in person. We were talking about what does a just recovery look like? What is sort of carrying through what we learned into the pandemic mean for us as cultural producers? And what does it mean for our communities? Does anyone want to volunteer, or should I call on someone again?
I can speak to that, Amanda, too. I just wanted to name that, one of the biggest things that came out post George Floyd, and especially what was happening in Minneapolis, was just the beauty of mutual aid, the beauty of communities actually just caring for each other. Not that they haven't cared for each other before, but more so with strangers and across different communities and with neighbors. And so we had to have real-time conversations about, like, hey neighbor, how you doing? Can I get you groceries when I go to the store? Or I think that in terms of a just recovery, I think that's the area that I feel like we're not paying enough attention to, is the systems that already exist outside of capitalism is mutual aid. But how do we actually strengthen that? How do we invest in that? How do we support that kind of system? So that's to me, that's what feels like an area that I think our communities are grappling with. And what we're seeing in real time too, what do we do about, how do we start talking about abolition? How do we start actually thinking about a police-free world? What is that radical imagination that DA had mentioned? Because without that, we wouldn't have even thought that abolition would be possible, right? And so I think that's what needs to happen. So the quote that folks in the nonprofit industrial complex keeps bringing up is the saying that we can't go back to the way things were, and that's true. But I wonder, well, what are the things that we're trying to move forward towards then? And I think that's the imagination that needs to happen, that this is why we're needed in these roles. This is why we make meaning of pandemics, right? And so, Toni Morrison talks about the invisible ink, like imagine a world with that, like that's what's happening. And I think, so I think in terms of a just recovery, we have to turn to creatives to actually see what that world looks like, and make meaning of it. And, otherwise we're gonna have tendencies to go back to the way that things were. But that's what I think. But yeah, and I wonder, because DA, you have been working on a couple of movement narrative work? I mean, what is that? When you talk about radical imagination, I'm curious what you mean by that too. What does that
Yeah,
mean?
I mean, I think, the point you made about abolition and some of these concepts that are becoming more enlightened for the general public, so have always been in the notions and imaginations of cultural communities, right? And cultural producers, because the pandemic is not a new journey for us, right? Like what Ananya mentioned, we've been living with pandemics of white supremacy and other capitalism and other structures that have been just as oppressive, just as destructive, just as harmful. So we understand the idea of recovery is also the idea of mutual aid, and we understand that the idea of recovery is also the duration time of harm reduction, right? So we understand how to move into these things that seem way off and imaginary to other folks seem very present and step by step and attainable for a lot of cultural producers and producers I know. So I am currently working in spaces about the narrative about reimagining public safety. So I have a position right now called the Storyteller in Residence with Pillsbury United Communities. And directly the work that I tried to bring to this organization was, how do we take narrative work that we do, cultural work that we do, and apply it directly to the policy that we need to maintain and to make this journey of harm reduction and make this journey of mutual aid until we get to the point of thriving, until we get to the point of where our imagination is realized, and sort of seeing within our communities, seeing that that's not a sort of pipe dream in a far off place. That's actually a place that's rooted in a lot of our own traditions and places that we're actually going back to in terms of community norms and sort of cultural things of the past that we have not been able to retain and maintain because of a lot of colonialism, a lot of white supremacy, a lot of these other oppressive systems that have extracted those things from our communities. So I would say the abolition work or work like abolition is not entirely imaginary. It's not even imaginary at all. In fact, it's kind of a matter of fact, and it's kind of matter of what we need. We need to get to a police-free future is not a conversation, a pie in the sky conversation for us, even the artists amongst us. It is a very practical, pragmatic next step conversation. And so I think that's reflected in the artwork too, in that it is so engaging. Like the work that Ananya is doing, the work that a lot of artists are doing around in these spaces is so engaging and so accessible, because it's not like, so what the academy and what the institution likes to do is make you think that all imaginary work is sort of, it's far off. It's detached from, like, that's why they make delineations between like crafts people and sort of neighborhood artists and community artists and high art, right? Like I don't make that distinction, because I believe that the art and the accessibility of even the most abstract concepts is there within my community. So that work is ongoing and it's constant, and I'm totally in it, because I feel like I was born in it. That's where I was born to be, and born to utilize my skills and my talents. So
Ananya, I see you nodding, and I know that before we were having conversations, I wondered if you could weigh in and give your perspective on what DA is talking about. You talked a little bit earlier in our pre-conversation about narrative and policy and how that relates to your work.
Yeah, so DA had been talking about the work, the direct relationship between the artistic process leading to policy. And I had always I find that very interesting, because I had always thought of how I I don't have any expertise in policy making, but when I say I do social justice choreography, I practice, I rehearse in an embodied way. So it is in my cellular imagination how, so if I don't practice, if I don't have a rehearsal of freedom, how will I'll imprison myself again once we have the practical conditions. But I think that I rehearse and I stage for people, for my audiences, I share this notion of what it might look like so that we can actually practicing it and embodying it is actually a way to get there. It creates the groundswell for policy shift. And I find it's, I don't know policy. So I understand that there's all kinds of there's all kinds of, when I see people talk, I see that they're like making a concession here, a concession there. But I think we can approach even policy differently if we practice, so I know that when I practice an opening of my torso, I know I have to connect my navel to my spine and bring my rib cage close so that I can really open. So my practice of liberation is grounded in ways, in alignment with a set of ideals, ideals that will keep my body safe too. So, and I feel like that's where I extrapolate from. And I want to say, Amanda, in answer to the first question you asked, also this just renewal. This has been such a time of dismantling. So my question is always also post-pandemic world is also this is specific to my community too, is also the post the publication of Isabel Wilkerson's Race and Caste, right? So I wanna hold up always dismantle, because we've also inherited white supremacy in all these ways that have lodged themselves in our imagination, ourselves. All of our communities have found ways to replicate these horrible hegemonies. So how can I every day ride on the winds of that dismantling energy and renew my commitment to a practice of liberation? That takes a lot of work, but I think that is the work that I'm committing to. That's for me, that's the just recovery.
Tricia, did you want to weigh in on this one as well?
So much to process. I just want to listen to Ananya keep talking. Ananya and I have also actually had quite a few conversations about a lot of these things. So it feels like a continuation of things we haven't been able to revisit in some time. Thinking about a just recovery, I think that one of the things I'm really invested in, also along the lines of like what is social justice within our work, is this idea that we're always pushing for marginalized voices, marginalized artists, BIPOC artists. And I think that the just recovery is in the space where we're no longer marginalized and that we are just the default. DA was talking about the high art and the separations between, I don't want community-based social justice art to be the, marginalized art. I want that to be our mainstream. That is the status quo. That is what art is. The weird highbrow stuff that's in the all white gallery space can be the marginalized art. So that's where we could flip things. But I also think about with the pandemic, these constructs that were completely just everything fell apart. Our sense of who we were, who our community was, how we move about, what it means to have a nonprofit arts organization. All these constructs were just sort of revealed and shown to us where their flaws were, where their cracks were, the constructs of our healthcare system, the constructs of the way that we work in spaces. And so I think that that's a big part of, for me, the just recovery as well, is letting go of constructs that have been sort of forced upon us, whether that's white supremacy or patriarchy, whatever it is, to move to new constructs that we create, but not just us, that the future generation creates. Because right now I'm trying to undo constructs that were created by a generation that didn't represent me or think about me. And so if I'm going to create new systems and ways of being for the future, I should actually not be creating it. Those that are younger than me, those that are coming up, those that have identities that are not my identity, should be creating those new ways of being. And so I think a just recovery is one that, you know, is rooted in culture and rooted in healing, and also driven by, you know, the next generation, really.
And can I add something to that? I think you just brought something up that's just really like been on my mind. Tricia, thank you for doing that. So during this idea, when we're talking about a just recovery, we will see institutions speak as if they've always been about a just recovery. We'll see power talk about, yes, just recovery, yes, let's do this, and be so like vehemently, you know, in support of it, but they will not do anything unless we force them to, unless we push them to, unless we make them uncomfortable. Even the people who stood in our face and told us, yes, I'm all about this just recovery. How do we get there? Let's have this conversation. Like the very next conversation you would have with them, you would have to be pushing and prodding them and making them uncomfortable, making yourself uncomfortable to the point where you have to sort of do that work. And to me, I feel like we're right at that point right now where we have a whole host of people who are supposedly supporting this conversation of a just recovery, but their actions are not speaking to that. I'll just be frank about that. We're having conversations about reimagining public safety in our cities, artist-led, artist-driven, creative-driven conversations, and the powers that be are still trying to figure out a way to not enact this beautiful sort of response and beautiful sort of organic call and cry. So I just wanted to say that too, because I feel like, especially amongst art institutions, there is always a willingness to have the image of being engaged in this, but that's not necessarily having the actual activity of being engaged in.
Ananya, I see you shaking your head like, yes, an agreement. Tell us, what's on your mind? What are you thinking?
You know, because Toni Morrison was brought up, and I remembered, and what DA said is totally true. Remember when she said, so I pulled it up, the very serious function of racism is distraction. It keeps you from doing your work. It keeps you explaining over and over again your reason for being. Somebody says you don't have no language, so you spend 20 years proving that you do. So, you know, that quote, and I was like, oh yes, there is this beautiful dream. So, you know, with abolition, liberation, this notion of being able to walk for children, Black children, to play freely on our streets, as all children should be able to do. That's us. The fact that it's contested is problematic, but nonetheless, here we are. We want something as simple as that, and then you have to. We can't work towards it because we're like fighting. Oh, we have to explain. This distraction is an energy suck, and I condemn it.
Yes, I love this energy. You know, you bring up a funny point too, DA, because I can't remember, I think it was Adobe, when I talked to Adobe a few weeks ago, and she was talking about how, you know, like, we notice how the moment they know how to speak our language, right? They know what the right words to say, the type of social justice narratives that they adopt, that they took from us, the more that we will think that it sounds right, so it must be right. And it is a distraction. So I want to name that too. And Kathy, it was funny because we also got looped into this conversation with, I won't name who, but y'all already know which our institution we're talking about, but there was discussion around cultural reparations too, and how they're all having this sort of reckoning around, oh, we should give money to BIPOC folks now. Let's go find out who they are. And it was so interesting because it came out of nowhere. And I was like, are you just trying to have a checkbox you're trying to mark off, or what's going on? You know, and so all of a sudden they also don't know what to do with all of a sudden money is just appearing out of nowhere. When we knew that it was there, but you told us you didn't have it. So there's definitely not just an energy sucker, but they're holding on to resources that they know they have always had, right? And so I think that is the reckoning. And all of a sudden now all kinds of discussions around equity, equity, equity. Well, I don't know if they actually know what that means. And you know, until we start seeing more cultural reparations, and I'll turn to Kathy about this too. We're like, we don't want just more money. Like, we need you to actually flip this whole thing around. But yeah, Kathy, what are your thoughts on that too? Because
me, you're talking to me. Yeah, this is such a fascinating conversation, and I'm just really honored to be on a panel with these amazing thought leaders here. So I just wanted to, I guess, back up and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. So many things that people have said have resonated with me. I've got thoughts here and there. I've jotted down a few things, some things that I think I really need to acknowledge though. Tricia said that she didn't want to recreate systems of oppression, and Ananya's statement about inheriting white supremacy. Something that I think that I've been a part of, and that's something for me to confront and for us to confront in the Arab community, is our proximity to this white supremacist system, the part that we play in it in our community, the anti-Blackness in our own community. This is something we really need to confront. How are we a part of this system that oppresses Black people? And we have Black Arabs in our community. How are they represented or not represented in our institutions? You know, the corner store where George Floyd was killed was owned by a Palestinian, and many of the corner stores and small stores in the Black community are owned by Arab Americans or Arab immigrants. And so how are we a part of this system? And what is the complexity that comes from our immigrant community who buys into whiteness and wants to, you know, be a part of the system where they are oppressing somebody else? And what is our role in it? What is my role personally? And what is our community's role? What are those of us who are privileged with access to funds and education in confronting this? And so I really wanted to bring that up. I've been a part of some of these conversations on a national level and a local level, but so much more needs to be done. And I feel like this is something that has really come to the forefront publicly, I guess, in the artistic community, but it's not a secret or something new or something we haven't talked about, I think, for many, many years in the Arab community. So I really did want to bring that topic up, that point out. I couldn't sit here and not acknowledge the fact that I benefit from some of that privilege.
Kathy, you know, what you've just raised is something that the Latinx community has been dealing with presently, but also historically as well. You know, the way that Latin America was colonized was through white supremacy. It was conquest. You know, the Spanish came, the French came, the British came. And so we have that legacy as well. And yes, as a Latina, you know, I am not undocumented. I can walk into a store and, you know, demand customer service. I have talked back to police officers and known that I was going to be safe because I'm a woman, because I'm a Latina, because I you know, have citizenship. And absolutely the anti-Blackness that came through colonization, you know, it's like the first layer in Latin America. And then when we come as immigrants to this country, the way that race was constructed and where that pushes us to aspire to be, so that we are not persecuted in the same way that Black folks are, really, really motivates a lot of the decisions that we make about politics, about who we align ourselves with. You know, that plays a role in art, that plays a role in education. It really fundamentally shapes these sort of systems and structures and the everyday decisions that we make about where we're going to put our energy, and who we are going to sort of align with. So, you know, I also want to, when we talk about solidarity work, I think undoing that white supremacy and that anti-Blackness for Latinx communities is at the core of what we, you know, we must address, because I think until we address that, we're not going to be able to really move forward. And there's a lot of resistance in Latinx communities to that sort of idea that it's class and not race. And it's so intimately bound up. There is no way. I mean, we have artwork that dates back to the colonial period that illustrates those classes and you know, the folks that were married and who had more political power, and that political power, that social power is always related to whiteness. Whoever was the most European had more political power. So that really resonated with me as well. I wanted to get to some of the questions in the chat. Angela, and it's going to kind of shift the conversation, but I think that's okay. So from Angela, she says, I'm an artist that has been struggling with being in the midst of the portal. Do you have any insights, practices, or thoughts on how to sustain art making and imagination? And I'll give a little bit, you all can think about that. And so I have a relative who is a musician, and they're very, very social. And one of the ways that they create is through collaboration with others, you know, and they have found this time incredibly challenging, just like Angela says. They feel like their sort of creative well is a little bit dry because they're not out and communing, and, you know, they feel like, you know, Zoom can only get us so far. For me personally, what it's made me do also is just kind of shift what I think is quote unquote art making, you know, or my everyday sort of things that I'm doing with my new baby. How does that relate to the art making? When we talk about generation, you know, the next generation, are the things that I'm doing every day with my child, am I laying the groundwork for future art making? I think that's how I've been seeing sort of inspired, is knowing that my energy right now may be a little bit more intimate, it may be smaller, it may be within the confines of my apartment, it's not very public, but it's important nonetheless, and I need to make space in my practice for that as well. So how about everybody else? And then I'm just gonna call on someone just to kind of keep the conversation going. I think maybe Tricia.
You know, I thought about this a lot early on, again early on in the pandemic. That's crazy that I can say that, but there was a lot that was coming out at the beginning of the pandemic, kind of putting artists in a place of salvation. You know, like, the artists are going to save us. Artists are made for this time. Like, this is when artists thrive. All of this kind of rhetoric was coming out, and that really sat really not right with me, because first of all, it kind of positioned society in this way that artists owe us something, or that artists, you know, when we're in crisis, artists have to create to show us the way. And I really feel like that's problematic, because I don't believe that artists are valued or economically compensated in our society in order to warrant that kind of expectation either. So I think that really it's just important to know that for artists, this time that we're in, this portal process, this is a time of reflection and research and observation and practice. And so there doesn't need to be a grand, you know, masterpiece or something that comes out immediately. I think that just as we're revisiting, you know, how we go about our daily lives, I think there's new restrictions in terms of how you create. So like, maybe you're not using your studio space anymore, or you know, there's just, you don't have access to certain materials because of financial limitations. And so in that limitation, a lot of times you can come up with new creativity. So I think it's just like, you know, don't expect too much of yourself as an artist, and know that like the process of this time is part of your practice. And If nothing is speaking to you to create your own art, then immerse in other people's arts. Just look at other artists' Instagrams and see what they're posting, watch their process videos, go on a challenge to watch films by Indian American directors, or, pick a category and just immerse in someone else's art for a while. But yeah, I think mainly is release the pressure that now is the time for artists to save the world. You are saving the world, and that'll happen in the time it needs to.
Yeah. And I think in terms of coming through something, on the other side of the portal, that's definitely something to hang on to, is that the sort of like overproduction, the emphasis that sort of capitalism puts on production. That's something that I'm going to be resisting moving forward. And that sort of quiet time, immersing myself in somebody else's work, is something that I want and have always made space for. But definitely, Tricia, the way that you're talking about it, that's something for me that does sustain art making, that we all taking the time to enjoy what people put out into the world, that's part of practice as well. Who else would like to weigh in?
I've just been reminding myself to not just redefine, but define. And what I mean by that is a lot of my art is sort of responsive to the times. So, I did a recent project called Excited Delirium, because it's a term that the police use to justify their restraints and their movements. And so I redefined that term and applied it to healing arts and movement arts. And so I had a collaboration with an artist, Deja Joelle Stowers, and I filmed her dance and then projected it in spaces that were damaged as a result of the uprising. And so I wanted to also do the balance of not just redefining that term, but sort of defining what a projection space should be, right? Like my new idea around how you project images now has some concept around projecting them against walls that have been burned out, so they have their own texture, their own relief, and they change the concept of the projection. So now I'm in a place of defining what projection is, even public display for a film, right? So it's displayed so people can walk by and notice it, as opposed to gathering in a space and sitting in theater seats and noticing it. So, that's just been my own challenge to myself, is to define and not just redefine. So I think I'm not trapped in this idea that I can only be, like Tricia is saying, I'm not trying to be a savior for society as being an artist. Like, I'm not carrying that weight through the portal. Sorry, dropping that off. That bag is too heavy. So that's just been my sort of advice to myself.
Either Kathryn or Ananya.
I'll just say, because many of my students are here, so I welcome them to this conversation. I think that, the moving courage, I agree with Tricia and DA that it was really irritating when artists were like, oh, there was this pressure. This is the time for imagination, as if it's, perform under pressure. It's ridiculous. But I do think that we can move courageously towards where the energy is. So I had a great performance because I was invited to perform at a rally on Lake Street when for the forced sterilizations of women who were imprisoned from the borders. And I felt like, it's difficult because it's on the street. I don't know what my feet can do. It's tiny and it's not good sightlines. Well, forget that. The energy, that's where the energy was. And I just went with it. And I felt like I felt like I connected to a different process of meaning making. And I think that old adage, you have to go where the energy is calling you, which is what I think DA is doing, and transforming spaces as well in the process. So I just wanted to go courageously towards where the energy is. Look for where the energy is.
Kathryn, would you like to add anything to this one?
Well, I don't want to take up too much more time because I see we only have 15 minutes and I don't have a lot more to add than what everyone else has already said. Although I agree with what everyone has said, I don't like the pressure that I have put on myself since I've called myself an artist, that I have to produce. And then with the pandemic and everything, the political situation that's come up and all of the trauma around that, sometimes the best thing you can do is just make sure that you are calm enough to fall asleep at night rather than having to, make a brand new artwork that, you feel this pressure. So I just appreciate everybody, what you said, and agree with it. And then also to what Ananya said, I myself also have ventured into a new art form, which, because I do theater and there's not much you can really do with live theater right now. I don't particularly like Zoom play. And I've gotten into working with some artists and doing some animation, which is really exciting for me, a new way to create. But yeah, no pressure.
Yeah, I think definitely the no pressure is something that I absolutely work on every single day. And also just being open to new sort of ways of creativity and productivity. There's another question in the chat that I want to get to. Lee Her with the Minnesota Department of Education asks to the panel, what are specific implications, if any, of your work on public education, specifically how it confronts inequity in that system? Can I call on someone, or is someone ready with that one?
I mean, I can chime in a little bit because we do a lot of community education work, and part of it was because a lot of the education was not accessible to the communities I work with. They weren't affordable. They're either you had to be a college student, pay thousands of dollars of tuition. So, we flipped a lot of that around, kind of these pop-ups, and now Zoom has made things so much more accessible in many ways, but it's also has created digital divide with those who don't speak the same language either. So a lot of those kinds of inequities came up. And also as a mother who has children with certain special needs, it was just not, it's chaotic to even think, how do we have our children learn in an era like this, right? And not only do we as people of color have to try to make space in where there are no boundaries. Right? And we love our space where we can do our work, but when you're a parent, there, my kid's gonna be banging on the door while I'm trying to write, or what do you do, and now it's just so I think that those type of inequities have come up for us. But yeah, with my work, I think public education is having their own questions about this. I think I posted on Twitter a while ago, I got in trouble with a specific county attorney about going after my child not logging into a certain system to get attendance. And so we started getting notices about having to attend webinars on, and it was just funny because then it brought up this whole issue and discussion around with distance learning, especially, like how are we seeing success for our children during a pandemic? For me, as long as my kids have food on the table and they can consume it and digest it and still wake up the next day, I am so grateful for that very simple fact, and that we don't have COVID. So I think that's success to me. So I wish there was more conversations around with parents and educators to talk to us about, what do you feel like is successful? And what do, instead of saying that children are failing in schools was a headline. Well, no, they're not failing. The system has been failing them. So that's what I would say. But yeah, accessibility, digital divide are things that came up.
Yeah. And I think we just got to push a more expansive idea of education anyway, because, you know, even before this, I was always a proponent of like an experiential education model. I've taught that through HECUA on the university level. But the key to it was like through an organization like HECUA, students could receive actual credit for it. They could get credentials for this expansive idea of learning. Like, we've confined, the younger you get, the more they're confined about how they get credit for the type of learning that they do. And I think that's somewhere we need to really push, since we're in this sort of weird experience that's been foisted upon us. We have to push back to the institutions and say, you know, actually my child is learning much better when they're at home with me half of the time, right? Regardless of if I'm doing your particular curriculum and it's sort of standardized in that way. There are a lot of other skills, a lot of other things that are being learned, a lot of other holistic learning that is coming into play. And just the only conflict is that they're not receiving credit for it, or they're being punished for not being part of the sort of the more systemic part of it. So I feel like, you know, there is an opportunity here for us to push the idea of education and what a quality education is and where a student can get credentials.
Yeah, I think artists have had a long trajectory in public education. And I can speak from my experience. I'm part of a collective where the majority of the collective members are educators, and they have had success in sort of creating alternative school models, like a school within a school, where the sort of experiential learning, going out into the world, being engaged in community, you know, sort of city as classroom practices that are deeply rooted in, you know, addressing inequity. They have been able to do that not only in their classrooms, but also with their own children. And this sort of support of public education and focusing and making sure that public education is a part of their studio practice, or just, you know, education in general. I know, you know, my husband is an artist, and at some point in his life, I know that there was a transformation where he stopped considering being a teaching artist as something adjacent to his practice, but at the core and the center of it. And I'm wondering, you know, in terms of that, you know, education, whether it's public education outside of the system, because we know that the system has extreme limitations. And sometimes what Ananya, you were saying is, you know, you're trying to establish that something is the way that it is for many, many years. I feel like a lot of artists also feel like they spin their wheels within the public education system, and their energy sort of gets subsumed by that you know, resistance work. And then sometimes their work out in the public, like your work, you know, with performance out in the public now, it's reaching more audiences outside of that sort of public education system. I guess that's not a question, but I'm wondering, yeah, the portal, you know, we're carrying through this sort of, what are we not going to do anymore with our young people? What are we going to do with our young people once, you know, once we're quote unquote back to normal? I think also, Tricia, your work with artists who are younger, it was something that I was thinking about before this talk. You intentionally chose to focus on folks who are, I think, under 30, and potentially doing their own re-education post public education. And how does education come up for you in your work?
I think in terms of the arts, it's about access. Art school is incredibly expensive, and I teach at an art school, but I think about in terms of the program we've created, you have entry into it whether you've gone to art school or whether you haven't. Self-taught artist is equally valued to an educated artist. And then how do you have those types of artists be in space together to teach each other? One of the things that we are developing is a critique program that will be very much like what you can find at MCAT or the University of Minnesota Art Department, but how do we start to create these educational critique-based programs outside of the university system? Because the truth of it is there are so many BIPOC artists that will never be able to access, nor should they go into that level of debt for that educational experience. So in terms of contemporary arts ecosystem, I'm really curious about emulating that higher education experience without, having to go into that institutional space. That's a choice. And myself and Leslie Barlow, who I run the program with, we both teach in arts programs, and we go back and forth about whether or not we should be teaching as adjuncts, and that's a hard space as women of color, knowing how few teachers there are that are like us in that space. But it's draining as much as it is fulfilling. And so there's, layers and layers around education and the space that it creates. But I think most importantly is for underrepresented artists and under-resourced artists to have access to the same things that other folks can get from higher education.
I want to turn it to Ananya because I know Ananya's got to go.
Thank you. So I don't know, I haven't been working inside public schools, grade school for a long time, but I think of my work in the university as, in India we have termites. So there's a perfectly good looking table. You go to pick it up. They've eaten it all from inside. So I think of my work as inspired by termites. Like, how can I be inside this system and try to break the things from within? So, and I always feel like if I could invite my students to just learn how to dance in a way that we build relationships with each other, because that's just so missing, this ability to build relationships, be thoughtful about each other, then maybe we would understand each other's pain a little better. So, and maybe and work from that, and I also want to hold space. I want to invite in all BIPOC students to come and fill these spaces, because it's a beautiful dance space. Come on, let's dance together in it too. So I want to, it's complicated. The answer is complicated, but I think we can shift from within and without. It's both and.
I think that talking about relationship making and what are your challenges. Today I know that I learned a lot about all of your work, and I'm so grateful to Chanita for her work in putting together the exhibition, all of these discussions. And today I want to be mindful of time. We're almost out of time, so I wanted to turn it over back to Chanita for anything we need to do to wrap up today. And I hope that we're able to, I will work to connect with you all off of Zoom, perhaps at first on social media, and then once we can be in person again in real life at your events.
Yeah, thank you so much to Amanda and our amazing speakers. It'll be so nice to see everybody like in physical form sometime this year, hopefully. But yeah, I don't have much to say other than I hope this is a good starting point to more conversations and dialogue with everybody and more BIPOC folks too, and creatives. And yeah, just want to invite everybody to see each other's work, check out everyone's work that's coming up, and also drop any links to things that are coming up for you that you'd love to also welcome the group to. For us, we just have our exhibit, which I mentioned, and our staff can drop in the link to our 1.5 show. It started in, I can't remember, September. Maybe it was September. It's been such a long thing, Laura. I don't even remember. But it is over this month. I invite you all. It's a completely free stroll outside as long as you can bear the weather. Just make sure, you know, it's not negative 45. But yeah, so that's what we have going on. It's on Robert Street at the M, and then also in the Skyway. There's a short film by Vietnamese artist. But yeah, so please feel free to check that out. And I invite everybody to more conversations like this. It's been very powerful, and it's been a much needed moment to be in community with everybody.
The light, and I've been meaning to.
That's like the Oscar music going on. Thank you. They said there's no Oscars, but I am at Total Landscaping. So I have an announcement. That's my announcement. Yeah, so thank you to everybody who joined us. I can't wait to see where this goes. And I look forward to more building, more creating, and just being in community together. But that's all I have for wrap up. We were gonna do rapid fire questions as the last thing, but I am gonna pick one. Is there a favorite comfort food you want to share and leave everyone with? That's one question, or you can pick the other question. What is a gift that you hope to leave with the next generation?
I'll kick it off. My comfort food is absolutely all-time pizza, and it's yes, and something I hope to leave the next generation with. I'll do too, is to have grace for themselves.
My comfort food is manaish, which is flatbread with.
Know what we've been through, or am I just going? Was that you? Look.
I'm sorry. Keep going.
That's okay. That's it. It's an Arabic flatbread with a mixture of za'atar and olive oil. My father used to make it every Saturday morning, and I make it, and it's very comforting for me.
That's great. Thank you. DA or Tricia?
I don't have a comfort food, but I got a comfort drink, you know. If we're gonna be honest, the Kentucky Mule is hitting. Bullet bourbon. Mm-hmm. If you are one who likes to get down with dark liquors.
Thank you. Tricia?
This is making me hungry, but my comfort food is khao soi. It's like curry from Chiang Mai in Thailand, and I would normally be in Thailand at this time, but I'm not because of COVID, so I'm dreaming. And the next generation, I just hope they get to travel, actually, if the pandemic goes away, so that we can learn more about each other.
That's right. Well, thank you so much to everybody and to our participants for joining. Please keep connected, and yeah, that's all I have. If any of the speakers want to stay after to check in on anything, feel free to. But we'll say our farewell to folks who were able to join. Thank you. This is where we cue to the DJ. Here we go.
Warehouse wages kill the ends. Introduction, man, I should have schooled it up when I was younger. Should have stuck to plan. Always had the dreams of being more self-assertive. And my kid's a teenager, now he needs the health insurance. So break my body, break my soul down. Just another zombie walking blindly through your ghost town. Pull up to the bar, to politic and tap the power. Ain't nobody really all that jolly at your happy hour. But I don't wanna go home yet, so I'ma talk to my cigarette and that television set. It doesn't matter what brand or station, anything to take away from the current situation. No overtime pay, no holiday, months behind on everything but the lottery. Winter around the corner, guaranteeing that my car dies. Wifey having trouble trying to juggle both the part-times. My cup ain't close to filled up. We tryna build up so we can have enough. And when I finally get the color, won't be nothing left to paint on. A friend of mine tried to kill himself to the same song.